He faced tanks, missiles, and threats without fear. But one man's story and a single child's shoe broke Netanyahu in front of the world, and no one was supposed to see it. The room was cold, quiet, too quiet. No reporters, no cameras, no phones, just thick walls and secrets. Everything about it felt wrong. The air, the silence, even the smell. It was like grief had been sitting in the corners for hours before anyone walked in. At the center of the long, dark table sat Benjamin Netanyahu. He didn't look nervous. He never did. He sat like a man who had stared down decades of wars, condemnation, and protests, and walked away untouched every time. In front of him, a closed folder. His fingers tapped it slowly, rhythmically. The tapping wasn't impatient. It was practiced, controlled, like a man who knew exactly when to speak, and when silence was more powerful. A few aides sat behind him, stiff, silent, unreadable. Not one dared speak without a cue. He was expecting routine talks, cold diplomacy, the usual scripted language, de-escalation, sovereignty, security concerns. Another day in the life of a man who saw politics as war and war as politics. But today, something was different. The heavy double doors opened. Ibrahim Traoré stepped in. The young leader didn't carry papers. No briefcase, no entourage, just him. His walk was steady. Each step felt intentional. His eyes locked on Netanyahu. Calm, unreadable, but there was something under the surface. A weight. Storm held back by sheer will. He didn't nod. He didn't speak. He took the seat across from Netanyahu, closer than expected. The aides exchanged quiet glances, but said nothing. Then the door opened again, and this time it wasn't a president or a general. It was a man in his 30s, clothes plain, shoulders tired. He held something wrapped in cloth, clutched tightly to his chest. Moussa, a Palestinian French doctor from Gaza, not on the guest list, not part of any delegation, just there. A UN official followed behind, tense. "He has 2 minutes," he said under his breath. "Special humanitarian testimony." Netanyahu turned his head slightly, not alarmed, more curious, like someone had brought a chess piece to a poker table. Moussa sat down. His hands shook slightly. His breath trembled, but his eyes, they were empty, not angry, just hollow. He didn't look at Netanyahu. He looked at the floor. "I'm not here for debate," he said softly. "I just want to tell you about someone." The room stilled. Even the guards at the wall turned slightly, listening. Moussa unwrapped the cloth on his lap. Inside was a child's shoe, small, torn, burned at the edges, faded blue with cartoon stars barely visible. The kind of shoe a child wears while pretending to be a superhero. No one spoke. "He was 4, Moussa whispered. "He used to run around the clinic halls, always laughing, always flying imaginary planes." His voice didn't rise. He wasn't here to shout, but every word sounded heavier than stone. One night, the sky opened. We heard the whistle. The blast shook the whole city. His home gone. We searched all night. His hands gripped the shoe tighter. We found him under a wall. He was holding a toy plane. A pause. I told his mother he went fast, that he didn't suffer, but I lied. Something shifted in the air. Not the temperature. Not the lighting. Something inside the people in the room. Traoré didn't blink. He watched Netanyahu, quiet, focused, like a hawk watching for one crack. Netanyahu sat still, but his tapping had stopped. One of his aides crossed their arms, eyes twitching nervously. Moussa placed the shoe gently on the table, like it still belonged to the boy. Like letting go of it too fast would break something sacred. No one told his story, he said. No news article, no headline, not even a name. The shoe sat in front of Netanyahu, burned, silent. And that's when Traoré leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He simply asked, "Do you remember the name of even one child buried under your orders?" The question didn't need volume. It had weight. For the first time in the entire room, Netanyahu blinked, then looked down. He didn't answer, because in that moment, he couldn't. Netanyahu didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at the small burned shoe on the table, like it belonged to a memory he didn't want to remember. The silence was thick. You could hear the breath of every person in the room, and the weight of what wasn't being said. Traoré leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on Netanyahu. Then Mouse's voice broke the silence again. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," he said. His voice was quieter now, like he was no longer speaking to a room, but to himself. "I came because I carry stories inside me. Stories I can't sleep through. Stories that never made it out of the rubble." He reached into his coat, slowly, carefully. Some guards tensed, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper. A photo tucked inside. He slid it across the table. Another child, this one smiling, missing teeth, standing in front of a chalkboard, holding up a drawing of a son. She was 7, Mousa whispered. Smart, sharp. She wanted to be a teacher. He paused. She used to collect pieces of broken chalk, even colored ones. Sighed she'd never waste a word. His voice cracked, but he kept going. She was at school that day, when the drone circled, when the roof collapsed. Mousa stared down at the table. There was no warning. Traoré shifted for the first time, not to speak, but because his jaw tightened, just slightly. The story wasn't just hitting Netanyahu anymore. It was hitting him too. "I pulled her out with my bare hands," Mousa said. She was still breathing. She grabbed my shirt and said, "Tell my brother I saved the chalk." His breath caught. She died 2 minutes later. No one moved. No one even blinked. "I buried her with a box of chalk," Mousa added. "It was all I could give her." This time, Netanyahu looked at the photo, just for a second. But it was enough. Mousa leaned forward now, not to accuse, but to finish what he came to say. "You didn't fire the missile yourself," he said, "but you signed the papers. You approved the strike list. You built the silence that let her die without a name." Traoré finally spoke again. When truth dies quietly, power becomes poison. Netanyahu looked up. Something in his eyes had changed. Not regret, not guilt, but a flicker of something human, something worn. Mousa stood. He didn't ask for anything, not justice, not answers. He just whispered, "That's all," and started to walk away. The shoe stayed on the table. So did the photo. So did the silence. Mousa walked slowly toward the door. No one stopped him. No one looked away. Even the guards couldn't move. His footsteps echoed in the cold room like a reminder of what power usually ignores. He didn't slam the door when he left. He didn't need to, because the storm he brought was already inside. Netanyahu sat still. His hands no longer tapped. His eyes drifted to the objects in front of him. The shoe, the picture of the girl with the chalk, and then quickly away. For the first time, he looked tired. Traoré was still seated across from him, elbows on the table, hands folded, eyes unblinking. Then he spoke. "I didn't bring him here to shame you," he said. "I brought him here to show you what war looks like when it isn't filtered." Netanyahu didn't answer, just a small twitch at the corner of his mouth, like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the right words anymore. "You've built walls," Traoré continued. "Walls of defense. Walls of pride, walls of history. He leaned forward, voice calm, low, dangerous. But no wall can hold the weight of a child's last breath. A pause. Then, you were told it was a military zone, Traoré said. Netanyahu finally looked at him. Traoré didn't blink. I've seen the intelligence. The target that day wasn't a weapons cache. It was a rumor passed through 4 hands. No confirmation. Number. Eyes on the ground. Netanyahu's jaw tensed. You signed it anyway, Traoré said. Because silence is easy when it protects your position. He reached into his own folder now. Something Netanyahu didn't expect. A photo. Satellite imagery. Dated. Labeled. With red circles. He placed it in front of Netanyahu. You know what this is, Traoré said. You've seen it before. It was a schoolyard, a garden, a playground, before it was bombed. Netanyahu's eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Traoré lowered his voice further. You knew this wasn't about defense. It was about message, power, control. That strike was a decision to teach fear, not to prevent war, but to prove you could. He paused, and then he said something Netanyahu never expected to hear. Do you know why I came here? Netanyahu finally spoke. Because you hate me. Traoré shook his head. No, I came here because I'm afraid. I'll become like you. Silence. The words hit harder than any accusation. I lead soldiers too, Traoré said. I make decisions. I sign orders. And every time I do, I wonder whose name I'm bearing without even knowing it. He looked at the shoe. Then the photo. Today, I needed to see you. To know if the silence ever catches up. If the weight ever breaks through the power. He leaned back. And now I know. Netanyahu looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't look like a leader. He looked like a man caught between the past and the truth. Caught between legacy and shame. But Traoré wasn't finished. One day, this shoe and that girl's photo, they'll be in a museum. He paused, not to remember what was destroyed, but to remember who refused to listen. The room stayed frozen. Time felt slow, heavy, unforgiving. Traoré stood up quietly. He didn't glare. He didn't gloat. He just gave Netanyahu a final glance that felt more like sorrow than anger. Then, he turned to leave. But before he could reach the door, Netanyahu spoke. I remember one. Traoré stopped. The room didn't move. Not a single breath stirred. Netanyahu's voice was low, raspy, like it hadn't been used for truth in a very long time. One child, he repeated. I remember her name. Traoré turned. Netanyahu stared at the table, not at the shoe, not at the photo, just the empty wood between them. Her name was Rina, he said. 7 years old, lived near the border. I saw her picture in a folder. Big eyes, purple dress. He paused. She was on the wrong side of the fence. That's what the report said. His hand curled into a fist on the table. I signed it anyway. I was told it was a threat. I was told it would send a message. Traoré stayed silent, letting him unravel. I watched the feed. Netanyahu continued. Not the strike, the aftermath. I saw them pull her from the rubble. His voice cracked, just once. She had the same eyes as my granddaughter. He didn't say more. The room held him there, caught between what he was and what he couldn't forget. Traoré walked back slowly, but this time he didn't sit. He stood beside the table, looking down at the man the world saw as unbreakable. And he saw a man who was breaking. You remembered her, Traoré said quietly, but you kept going. Netanyahu nodded, a single fragile nod. Because stopping meant facing it, he said, and I couldn't. For a moment, Traoré said nothing. Then, why tell me now? Netanyahu looked up at him, eyes red but dry. because I don't want to leave this earth without someone. Knowing that once, just once, I hesitated. That line landed like a whisper through stone. Traoré looked at him, not as an enemy, but as a man at the edge of his own story. You think remembering one makes it better? Traoré asked softly. No, Netanyahu replied. But forgetting all of them made me worse. A long silence stretched between them. And for the first time, it wasn't heavy. It was honest. Traoré took a breath and then placed a folded paper on the table. It was blank on the outside. What's this? Netanyahu asked. A name, Traoré said. Not from your war. From mine, a child I couldn't save. He looked Netanyahu in the eyes. We carry them differently, but we both carry them. And with that, he turned, walked to the door, and left. No one spoke as he passed. The room stayed still. Netanyahu opened the paper. One name, a drawing. A small sun in the corner, sketched in yellow pencil. He stared at it for a long time. And for the first time in years, Benjamin Netanyahu cried. Not loudly, not in front of cameras, not for sympathy, but in a room where power used to make him untouchable. He finally broke. The folded paper with the child's name stayed in his hand. His fingers curled around it like it was the last piece of something he couldn't explain. The aides in the room didn't move. They had never seen him like this. Some looked away. Some lowered their heads. And one whispered, "Should I?" "No," Netanyahu said, wiping his face. "Leave it." His voice was raw. The shoe, the photo, the drawing, all left behind, like a memorial, like proof that even the coldest hands remember warmth when it's gone. Later that evening, after the meeting dissolved and the world assumed everything was business as usual, something unexpected happened. Netanyahu canceled his next 5 appointments. He didn't speak to press. He didn't even return to the Prime Minister's residence. Instead, he went home, alone. That same night, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a quiet group of students in Burkina Faso. They weren't diplomats. They weren't officials. Just young men and women. Many who had lost family too. He told them nothing about the details of the meeting, but he held up a drawing of a son. "I met a man today," he said softly. "He's led wars, shaped history, carried silence like a shield." He looked at the drawing, and for a moment, he became human again. One student raised a hand. Did he apologize? Traoré shook his head. No, but he remembered. And sometimes, remembering is the first rebellion against power. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a message arrived at Mouse's small clinic. No return address, no letter inside, just a small wooden box. Inside, the shoe, cleaned, repaired as much as it could be, wrapped in fresh white cloth. Mouse stood over it for a long time, then placed it in a glass case by the clinic's entrance. No caption, no explanation, just memory. A week passed, then 2, and on the 3rd Friday, a journalist leaked an internal memo, a classified line from the meeting. The line Netanyahu whispered, "I don't want to leave this earth without someone knowing that once, just once, I hesitated." It spread like fire. The internet exploded. Headlines twisted it. Politicians defended or condemned him. Some called it weakness. Others called it truth. But in Gaza, in a rebuilt school, a teacher printed the quote and taped it to the wall beside a photo of a little girl holding chalk. And above it, a new line was written in red marker. Let hesitation become humanity. Before memory becomes the only thing we have left. Months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. Wars continued. Talks resumed. Borders stayed bloody. But something had changed, and not on the news. In quieter places. A school in Kenya held a memorial for unnamed children lost to war, and read their names like prayers. even when some weren't known. A nurse in Lebanon stitched the outline of a child's shoe onto her headscarf as a silent protest. And in a Paris art gallery, a drawing of a sun hung beside a quote that read, "To remember is to resist." But not everyone forgot. Inside Netanyahu's office, the photo of the girl with chalk remained on his desk. Some aides whispered about it. Some said it was just for appearances. But the truth was, he never touched it, never moved it. He just left it there. One day, an aide asked if they should file it away. Netanyahu looked up. "No," he said simply. "She stays." Far away, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré walked through a children's hospital. He greeted each child personally, sat beside them, asked for their names. Some were too weak to speak, but he listened anyway. Before leaving, a child handed him a folded paper. It was a drawing, a stick figure, a sun, a hand holding another hand. Traoré smiled gently and slipped it into his pocket, the way some people carry a weapon. Or a promise. Moussa, back in Gaza, rebuilt the clinic's front room. Above the display case holding the shoe, he placed a new sign. "This is not a symbol of grief," it read. "This is a reminder of what silence can cost." Tourists came. Journalists visited. Some cried. Some left quietly. One old man stood for an hour in front of it and whispered a name over and over. No one asked who it was. They understood. But the most unexpected ripple came from a child, a 12-year-old girl in Jerusalem who had seen the leaked quote online. She didn't understand politics. She didn't care about sides. She only knew one thing. A man with power once hesitated. And to her, that meant power could also change. She started a small club at her school. They called it the Rememberers. Every Friday, they lit a candle for a child lost in any conflict. Sometimes they read poems. Sometimes they just sat in silence. One Friday, they invited a guest to speak. He declined. But he sent them something instead. A small box. Inside, a folded paper. It read, "Her name was Rena. I forgot once. I never will again. Thank you for remembering when I couldn't." No speech. No politics. Just truth. Raw. Quiet. Real. And that, more than anything, is what stayed with the world. Not a press release. Not a policy shift. But the reminder that sometimes the most powerful confession is to simply remember who we were too afraid to see. Another child will be buried tonight. Another name erased. Another silence justified. But you watched this story. You can't unsee it now. Like if it shook you. Subscribe if these stories must be told. And comment below. How many more children must vanish before we all say no more? They say the dead are silent, but sometimes their silence is louder than the ones still living.